In a world where respect and trust are often taken for granted, one woman's quiet strength becomes the catalyst for extraordinary change. Maya Anderson, a poised and determined public relations director for Horizon Airlines, boards a routine flight with a secret mission to observe the company's operations from the shadows. But when a simple accusation spirals into a shocking confrontation, Maya finds herself the target of a deeply rooted bias that threatens not only her dignity, but the very integrity of the airline. What begins as an unjust humiliation at 35,000 feet sets off a chain of events that will expose long-buried truths, challenge power structures, and test the courage of those who have been silent for far too long. Along the way, unexpected kindness emerges from the unlikeliest of places, proving that even small acts of bravery can ignite waves of change. How does Maya turn adversity into opportunity? Who will rise to stand beside her when the stakes are high? And can one voice, speaking out against a broken system, truly reshape the culture of an entire company? The hum of engines echoed softly through the luxurious first-class cabin. Passengers settled into their plush leather seats as the faint aroma of freshly brewed coffee and warm towels filled the air. Overhead, compartments clicked shut one by one, and the quiet chatter of travelers blended with the soft music streaming through the speakers. Maya Anderson sat alone by the window, her polished navy blue blazer hugging her shoulders and a sleek leather briefcase tucked neatly at her feet. Her posture was calm, yet there was a subtle tension in the way her hands gripped the edges of her book. She was 35, with sharp brown eyes that missed nothing and an air of quiet determination that spoke volumes. Her dark hair was pulled back into a bun, revealing a pair of small gold studs, a rare indulgence that reminded her of simpler times. To anyone observing, Maya looked like just another business traveler enjoying the perks of first class. But her purpose on this flight was far from routine. As the public relations director for Horizon Airlines, Maya was traveling incognito to evaluate the crew's performance. Whispers of declining customer service had reached her office over the past few months, and it was her job to uncover the truth. The flight had been delayed by half an hour, and the cabin buzzed with subtle irritability. Across the aisle, a well-dressed businessman sighed dramatically, swatting away the warm towel a flight attendant offered him. "How hard is it to stick to a schedule?" he muttered, tapping impatiently on his tablet screen. Maya glanced up briefly, her eyes lingering on him for only a moment. She knew his type, well, demanding, entitled, and quick to find fault. With a small exhale, she returned to her book, though her mind wandered. Her job often put her at odds with people like him. She had worked tirelessly to climb the corporate ladder, but in doing so, she had learned to expect friction. Being a black woman in a leadership role often invited suspicion or outright hostility from those unwilling to see her as more than a stereotype. Yet Maya had spent years honing her resolve. Her success was no accident. It was hard-won through discipline, poise, and an unwavering sense of purpose. The cabin door opened abruptly, pulling her from her thoughts. Captain Ethan Reynolds strode into the aisle with his shoulders squared and his uniform pressed to perfection. Tall and broad-shouldered, he carried an air of practiced authority, though there was something hard-edged in his demeanor. His sharp blue eyes swept over the cabin, pausing briefly on Maya. For just a flicker of a moment, Maya noticed a flash of something unreadable disdain, perhaps before his gaze moved on. "Good afternoon, folks," he announced with a thin smile that never reached his eyes. "We will be taking off shortly. Thank you for your patience." Maya frowned slightly, an instinctive prickle of unease crawling up her spine. Something about his presence unsettled her, but she pushed the feeling aside. Years of navigating high-pressure environments had taught her not to overreact to intuition. Moments later, the plane began its smooth ascent, lifting gently into the sky. Maya leaned back in her seat and tried to relax. She allowed herself a small moment of calm, listening to the faint rustling of newspapers and the hum of conversation around her. Across the aisle, The impatient businessman had returned to his tablet, his irritation fading now that the flight was underway. The calm didn't last long. "My wallet!" The businessman's voice barked out suddenly, breaking the quiet. His face had gone pale, his brow furrowed with anger. "It's missing!" Heads turned as passengers exchanged concerned glances. A flight attendant hurried over, her expression carefully composed. "Sir, could you please check your belongings again? Sometimes things shift under the seat during takeoff." "I already looked," he snapped. "Someone took it. I had it before I boarded." The tension in the cabin thickened like a storm cloud. Maya looked up, her gaze sharp and alert. She saw the businessman's eyes dart around, scanning the cabin until they landed on her. For a long, uncomfortable moment, he stared. Maya met his gaze steadily, refusing to flinch under the weight of his unspoken accusation. "Ma'am," the businessman said, his voice loud and pointed. "I saw you sitting there when I boarded. You were the closest to my seat." Maya's eyebrows lifted ever so slightly, but she said nothing. She knew better than to engage too quickly. The flight attendant hesitated, clearly flustered. "Sir, let's not jump to conclusions. I'm sure—" The cabin door opened again, and Captain Reynolds reappeared. The moment his gaze fell on the businessman and the agitated murmurs, his expression hardened. "What seems to be the issue?" Reynolds asked. The businessman gestured wildly toward Maya. "My wallet is missing. She was right there when I sat down." Reynolds turned to Maya, his eyes narrowing. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to step aside so we can check your belongings." Maya's jaw tightened, though her face remained composed. "Excuse me?" she asked, her tone calm but edged with steel. "This is a security matter," Reynolds said, his voice clipped. "Your cooperation would be appreciated." The flight attendant shifted uneasily, her face pale. "Captain, maybe we should—" "Stay out of it!" Reynolds barked at her. Maya could feel the weight of dozens of eyes on her, passengers who were now whispering among themselves. She sat perfectly still, her hands resting on her book. "Captain Reynolds," she said quietly, "what evidence do you have to single me out?" "I'm not singling anyone out," Reynolds replied, though his tone made it clear that he had already decided otherwise. "I just need to rule out every possibility." Years of corporate politics had taught Maya when to stand her ground and when to comply for the greater good. Slowly, she closed her book and placed it on the tray table. "Fine. You are welcome to check my bag, but I suggest you tread carefully. There are protocols for this sort of situation." Reynolds ignored her warning, signaling for the flight attendant to proceed. The young woman's hands trembled as she rifled through Maya's meticulously organized bag. A tablet, a notepad, a scarf. Each item was carefully placed back as the search turned up. Nothing here, Captain," the attendant said softly, her voice nearly breaking with unease. "Check again," Reynolds snapped, his face flushing with frustration. "That will not be necessary." Maya's voice cut through the tension like a blade. Slowly, she reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out an ID badge. The golden lettering gleamed as she held it up for all to see. Maya Anderson, Public Relations Director, Horizon Airlines. The silence that followed was deafening. Reynolds' face went pale, though he quickly tried to recover. "Well, this is unexpected." "Captain Reynolds," Maya interrupted, rising to her feet. Her movements were calm and deliberate, her voice steady. "Your conduct has been inappropriate and discriminatory. I advise you to reconsider your approach before you escalate this further." The businessman's mouth opened and closed, his face turning red. At that moment, the flight attendant, her courage bolstered by Maya's calm authority, approached the man's seat. "Sir," she said softly, bending down, "I believe this might belong to you." In her hand, she held the missing wallet, retrieved from under his seat. The businessman stared at it, his expression crumbling into one of embarrassment. He muttered an apology, snatching the wallet back, but the damage had been done. The passengers murmured louder now, their unease directed at the captain instead of Maya. Maya sat back down, her expression composed, though her heart pounded in her chest. She knew this wasn't over. The captain lingered in the galley, his pride clearly bruised, but for now he had been silenced. As Maya stared out the window at the clouds rolling by, she exhaled slowly. For years, she had weathered storms like this moment when her competence, her dignity, and her humanity were called into question. Yet something about this incident felt different. This time, she knew there would be consequences. For the captain, certainly, but also for her. She was no longer content with silently enduring prejudice. The faintest smile tugged at the corner of her lips. Whatever happened next, she would face it head-on. Outside, the plane cut smoothly through the clouds, the sun breaking through the gray. For Maya, it was the first sign that change was in the air. The plane descended smoothly toward the tarmac, its engines humming like a restless current beneath Maya Anderson's seat. Outside the window, blinking red lights and dark streaks of asphalt rushed into view. The regional airport looked small and unfamiliar, a far cry from the bustling hub where the flight had been scheduled to land. Passengers were murmuring louder now, their voices a blend of confusion and concern. Whispers of security breach and "what happened?" rippled through the cabin like static electricity. Some glanced toward Maya, their eyes questioning, others staring uneasily at Captain Reynolds, who lingered near the front of the plane with his arms crossed tightly over his chest. Maya sat upright, her back straight as steel, her face calm despite the weight of the situation pressing heavily on her shoulders. She knew retaliation when she saw it. This unscheduled landing, this theatrical summoning of airport security, it was no accident. Reynolds was wounded, his pride too fragile to withstand the truth of his actions being laid bare in front of his passengers and crew. The wheels touched down with a low groan, the plane slowing to a halt at an empty stretch of tarmac bathed in harsh floodlights. Outside, clusters of security personnel were already waiting, their reflective vests flashing under the glare. The unease in the cabin was palpable now. Even the impatient businessman sat slumped in his seat, his face pink and his eyes fixed downward. A familiar figure appeared by Maya's side. It was Samantha Miller, the flight attendant whose hands had trembled during the earlier search. Despite her small stature, there was a quiet bravery about her as she leaned in close, her voice barely above a whisper. "Miss Anderson, I am so sorry," Sam said, her words heavy with regret. Her eyes darted nervously toward the galley, where Reynolds stood like a sentry. "Captain Reynolds is insisting you disembark first. He told the security team there's been a breach." Maya's jaw tightened, though her expression remained composed. "And what exactly does he think I breached, Samantha?" Sam hesitated, swallowing hard. "I think he wants to prove a point, ma'am." Maya took a deep breath, forcing herself to exhale slowly as she processed the weight of Sam's words. The truth sat heavy in her chest. Reynolds was making this about power, his power versus her dignity, and he had gone to such lengths that he was willing to disrupt the flight, to humiliate her further, just to reassert control. "I understand," Maya said finally, her voice steady. "Thank you, Samantha. Do not apologize. None of this is your fault." Sam lingered for a moment longer, clearly torn. "If there's anything I can do—" "You have already done enough," Maya said softly, meeting her gaze with a reassuring calm. "You stood up when it mattered most. That takes courage." Sam gave a small, reluctant nod before stepping away, leaving Maya alone with the hum of the engines and the disapproving whispers of passengers. From the front of the plane, Reynolds' voice rang out, "Miss Anderson, if you would please follow protocol and disembark first." Maya rose to her feet slowly, taking deliberate care to smooth the creases of her blazer. She could feel every eye in the cabin fixed on her, some curious, others quietly sympathetic. Collecting her briefcase, she turned to the aisle and walked toward the front with measured grace. Captain Reynolds stood at the doorway, his tall frame blocking the narrow exit. His smirk was faint, but it was there, a subtle curve of satisfaction at having regained control. "Miss Anderson," he said, his tone dripping with false politeness, "security will need to speak with you to clear up any misunderstandings." Maya met his gaze unflinchingly. "Is that so, Captain Reynolds? Or is this an attempt to distract from your earlier misconduct?" The faintest twitch of annoyance crossed his face, but he recovered quickly, gesturing for her to exit. "Let us not make this any harder than it needs to be." The floodlights outside struck Maya's face as she descended the metal stairs onto the tarmac. The air was sharp with the smell of jet fuel and the faint chill of evening. A cluster of uniformed security officers approached her, their expressions carefully neutral. "Miss Anderson?" one of them asked, his voice carrying a slight note of uncertainty. He was a middle-aged man with graying hair and kind brown eyes, his badge glinting in the artificial light. Maya stopped, producing her ID badge from her pocket before they could utter another word. Maya Anderson, Public Relations Director for Horizon Airlines. Her voice carried with it the weight of someone accustomed to being underestimated. "Do you mind explaining why I have been singled out and removed from this flight?" The officer's brows lifted as he studied the badge. The authority in her tone seemed to catch him off guard, and the other security personnel exchanged uneasy glances. "Miss Anderson, we were informed of a security concern on board. We did not realize you were—" "Let me stop you there," Maya interrupted, her words crisp but not unkind. "There has been no breach. I believe you will find that Captain Reynolds' actions have been unwarranted and discriminatory. I will be documenting everything that has occurred." The officer straightened slightly, nodding with a newfound respect. "Understood, ma'am. Please allow us a moment to verify with the crew." He gestured to the nearby team, and one of the younger officers hurried back up the stairs to confer with the flight attendants. Behind her, the sound of footsteps drew Maya's attention. She turned to see Captain Reynolds descending the stairs, his posture still radiating false authority. He paused halfway down, clearly uncertain of the scene unfolding below him. "Maya!" a familiar voice called out, cutting through the tense silence. Maya turned to see Sam standing at the top of the stairs, her face pale but determined. "Tell them the truth," she said firmly, her voice rising just enough for everyone to hear. Captain Reynolds whipped around to glare at Sam, but the damage had been done. The officers now looked between Maya and the captain, their expressions unreadable but watchful. Maya's heart swelled with quiet gratitude for Sam's courage. Unexpected kindness had had a way of tilting the balance, even in moments like this. The lead officer cleared his throat. "Miss Anderson, it appears there has been a misunderstanding. You are free to continue with us to the terminal. We will ensure your comfort while this is sorted out." Maya inclined her head. "Thank you." Reynolds stood frozen, his confidence wavering as the officers exchanged words under their breath. Sam watched from above, her expression fierce with quiet defiance. Maya turned back toward the terminal building, her steps steady and measured. The walk across the tarmac felt surreal. The weight of the evening pressed on her shoulders, but alongside it was a flicker of hope. Hope that even the smallest act of bravery could change the course of events. Sam's voice echoed in her mind, a reminder that there were still people willing to stand up for what was right. Inside the terminal, the lights were bright and harsh, a stark contrast to the dim, quiet plane. Maya was escorted to a private lounge to wait for the next steps. Settling into a plush chair, she exhaled slowly, allowing herself a moment to reflect. Her fingers brushed against her ID badge, the small piece of plastic that had, once again, proven her worth to others. The unfairness of it gnawed at her. How often she had to prove herself, how often she had to rise above doubt and discrimination. But tonight, something had shifted. Sam's unexpected support had cracked the foundation of Reynolds' arrogance. It was small, yes, but it mattered. It proved that people could still surprise her, that kindness, even in small doses, could tilt the scales toward justice. Maya leaned back and closed her eyes, the faint hum of the terminal all around her. She knew this was far from over. Tomorrow would bring questions, reports, and consequences. But for tonight, she let herself hold on to the spark of hope. Outside the window, the last rays of sunlight dipped below the horizon, and for the first time in hours, the sky looked calm again. The early morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Horizon Airlines corporate headquarters. The building gleamed against the backdrop of a sprawling city, all steel and glass, a monument to the company's success. Maya Anderson stood at the top floor in a glass-walled conference room, her silhouette sharp against the morning light. She gripped a ceramic coffee cup in one hand, its warmth a small comfort, and scanned the table filled with paperwork, devices, and tense faces. Across from her sat Richard Mason, the CEO of Horizon Airlines. He was a man in his mid-50s, his silver hair swept back, and his tailored suit crisp as always. Next to him was David Clark, the company's general counsel, a sharp, no-nonsense man with glasses that slid down his nose when he was deep in thought. Neither of them looked happy. Maya set down her coffee carefully and broke the silence. What happened on that flight was not just an incident, it was a breach of trust. Her voice carried across the room, calm and unwavering, though her heart beat steadily against her ribs. Richard ran a hand over his chin, his brows furrowed. "I have already received reports from the captain. He claimed there was a security breach." "Of course he did," Maya replied, her gaze narrowing. "That was retaliation, Richard." Captain Reynolds felt undermined when his authority was questioned, and rather than de-escalating the situation, he turned it into a spectacle at my expense. David leaned forward, his fingers laced together. "You're saying the landing was unnecessary?" "Not just unnecessary," Maya said firmly. "It was retaliatory and discriminatory." She pulled a small file from her bag and slid it across the table toward David. "The facts are clear. Reynolds targeted me without cause. The missing wallet had nothing to do with me. And when it was found, rather than admitting his error, he doubled down." David opened the file, his eyes skimming the notes and witness statements that Maya had gathered overnight. Her recollection of the events was crisp and professional, with quotes from passengers and crew members who had seen what happened. Richard sighed and leaned back in his chair. "Maya, you know how this looks to the board, to the media, and to our customers. If this story leaks, it could be a nightmare for Horizon Airlines." Maya's gaze hardened. "It already is a nightmare for the employees who experience this kind of behavior daily, but are too afraid to speak up. Do you think Captain Reynolds acted this way for the first time last night?" The room went silent. Richard's frown deepened, while David adjusted his glasses. "We need to act quickly," Maya continued. "Not just because this situation involves me, but because this reflects our culture. If Reynolds gets away with this, it will send a message to everyone in this company that bias, arrogance, and retaliation are acceptable." David tapped the folder with his pen. "What exactly are you suggesting?" Maya took a deep breath. "Start with an internal investigation. Interview the crew and passengers. Let the facts speak for themselves. Captain Reynolds needs to be held accountable." Richard raised an eyebrow. "And the public?" "I will handle the media," Maya said. "But our response needs to reflect our values. If we ignore this or try to minimize it, we will lose the trust of our customers, employees, and the public." Richard stared at her for a long moment before exhaling sharply. "Fine. David, coordinate with HR and get the investigation started. I want reports from every flight attendant and passenger who witnessed this." He turned his gaze to Maya. "You'll handle communications, but keep this quiet for now. The last thing we need is a frenzy. Maya nodded, satisfied for now. Thank you, Richard. As the meeting adjourned, David lingered as Richard left the room. Maya, he said quietly, you handled that well, but this will not be easy. Reynolds is well connected. You might face resistance. Maya looked at him, her expression unwavering. Resistance does not scare me, David. Being silent does. David gave a faint smile, one that suggested respect, before leaving her alone in the conference room. Back in her office, Maya sank into her chair, exhaustion tugging at her muscles. The events of the previous day replayed like a loop in her mind. She glanced around the space, clean, minimalist, with a single potted plant on the windowsill that struggled for sunlight. Photos of her family sat in a neat frame on her desk. Her mother, proud and smiling, her younger brother grinning, as if life were a constant joy. They had always been her anchor. Her mother's voice still echoed in her heart. Do not let this world change who you are, Maya. It is not your burden to carry everyone else's smallness. Maya allowed herself a moment to close her eyes. Smallness. That was exactly what Reynolds's actions had been: small, bitter, and rooted in insecurity. Yet the damage he caused was anything but small. A soft knock at her door startled her. She straightened in her seat as the door creaked open, and Samantha Miller stepped inside hesitantly. Miss Anderson? Sam's voice was timid, but there was something determined in her expression. Maya gestured for her to enter. Come in, Samantha. Please sit. Sam perched at the edge of the chair across from Maya's desk, clutching a worn notebook against her chest. She looked younger here in the fluorescent office lights, her flight attendant uniform replaced by simple, casual clothes. I just wanted to say thank you, Sam said quietly, for yesterday, for standing up to him. I have seen Captain Reynolds act that way before, but no one ever says anything. Everyone is too afraid. Maya tilted her head slightly, her eyes softening. You were brave, Samantha. You found the wallet and spoke up when it mattered. I want you to know that made a difference. Sam nodded, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the notebook. I wrote something down about Captain Reynolds, things I have noticed. I reported them to HR months ago, but nothing ever came of it. Maya's stomach tightened as Sam handed her the notebook. She opened it and scanned the pages, finding a detailed account of Reynolds' behavior over the past year. Inappropriate comments, belittling crew members, unfair targeting of certain passengers, especially those who looked like Maya. I thought maybe this could help, Sam said, her voice small. I just want things to be better. For the crew. For everyone. Maya looked up at Sam, a swell of gratitude rising in her chest. Thank you for this, Samantha. I promise you, it will help. Sam gave a small smile, relief flickering across her face. It feels good to finally do something. You did more than something, Maya said firmly. You did what was right, and sometimes, that is the hardest thing of all. As Sam left the office, Maya leaned back in her chair, clutching the notebook tightly. The words on its pages were a crack in the wall, evidence that this was bigger than just yesterday's events. Reynolds' behavior was not a fluke, it was a symptom of a deeper issue, and now she had a choice to make. Maya stared out the window, her eyes tracing the horizon where the sky met the city skyline. I will not let this be swept under the rug, she thought. For too long, people like Reynolds had been protected by silence, and it was time to break that cycle. This investigation would not just be about one man, it would be about the culture that enabled him. Her phone buzzed, breaking her thoughts. It was a message from David Clark. HR has begun interviews. Some flight attendants are sharing troubling stories. Keep pushing. We are with you. Maya exhaled slowly, a flicker of hope sparking in her chest. Unexpected kindness. Sam's courage, David's quiet support was beginning to build momentum, and Maya knew how powerful that momentum could be. As the sun climbed higher, spilling light into the corners of her office, Maya stood and reached for the notebook on her desk. She had work to do. The hum of the elevators was the only sound as Maya Anderson descended to the second floor of Horizon Airlines headquarters. She clutched the notebook Sam had given her the day before, its pages filled with detailed accounts of Captain Reynolds' behavior. It weighed heavily in her hands, a reminder that this wasn't just about what happened to her. It was about everyone who had suffered in silence. The second floor was quieter than the executive wing above. Rows of glass-walled conference rooms stretched along the hallway, and one room had been prepared for today's purpose. Maya had arranged for interviews to be conducted with the flight attendants and crew members who had worked alongside Reynolds. The HR representative, a composed woman named Ellen Monroe, and David Clark, the company's general counsel, were already waiting. Maya entered the room with quiet resolve. The space was simple and functional, a large table, stacks of bottled water, and a tray of coffee that had already gone lukewarm. Ellen stood and offered a tight smile as Maya entered. "Good morning, Maya," she said, her tone brisk. "We've started notifying the flight crew. A few of them have already arrived." David glanced up from a folder in front of him, his expression serious. "I'll be sitting in for all interviews," he added, adjusting his glasses. "This process has to be handled carefully. Some of them are understandably nervous." Maya nodded, lowering herself into a chair and placing Sam's notebook gently on the table. "They have every reason to be nervous. Speaking up against someone in Reynolds's position is no small thing." David inclined his head, agreeing. "We will reassure them that their jobs are not at risk and that their voices are safe here. Trust is everything in this process." Maya looked out the window to the hallway beyond. She could see a few flight attendants seated in the waiting area, some fidgeting nervously, others staring blankly ahead. Among them, Samantha sat quietly with her hands clasped in her lap. Her shoulders were tense, but there was a quiet resolve in her expression. "Let's begin," Maya said, turning back to the room. The first interview was with Jason Hunter, a senior flight attendant in his early 40s. He entered with a guarded expression, his pressed uniform and sharp posture betraying nothing of what he was feeling. Jason had been with Horizon Airlines for nearly 20 years, and it showed in his professionalism. "Thank you for coming, Jason," Maya began, offering him a reassuring nod. "We appreciate you taking the time to meet with us." Jason sat down, his fingers interlaced on the table. "Of course, ma'am," he said. "I just want to help." Maya leaned forward slightly, her tone soft but direct. "We are looking into Captain Reynolds' conduct, both on the flight in question and any prior incidents you may be aware of. I know speaking about these things can be difficult, but it's important." Jason glanced at David and Ellen, his brow furrowing. "I have worked with Reynolds for a while now," he admitted slowly. "There's always been something off about the way he handles things. He's quick to anger, dismissive." "Dismissive how?" David prompted, his pen hovering above his notepad. Jason sighed and shook his head. "If a crew member brought up an issue, whether it was with a passenger or another staff member, he would shut it down. He has this way of making you feel like you're overreacting. I have seen younger crew members leave the cockpit in tears because he belittled them." Maya's stomach tightened as Jason's words painted a clearer picture of Reynolds. It was familiar behavior rooted in arrogance and power. "Did you ever report him?" Ellen asked gently. Jason hesitated before answering. "Once, a year ago. A flight attendant, Leah, came to me after Reynolds yelled at her for questioning a passenger's behavior. She was only trying to do her job. I filed a report with HR, but nothing came of it." Maya exchanged a glance with David, both of them noting the pattern. Another ignored report. Another voice silenced. Jason looked directly at Maya now, his voice quieter but sincere. "It has been hard watching him get away with it. I know he's respected in the pilot community, but that doesn't excuse his behavior. What happened to you on that flight didn't surprise me. I wish I could say it did. Maya nodded, her tone firm but kind. Thank you for sharing this, Jason. It matters more than you know. The interviews continued for hours. One by one, flight attendants and crew members came forward to speak. Each story built upon the last, creating an undeniable pattern of behavior. Some were hesitant at first, their voices shaky as they recounted incidents they had buried for months or even years. Others were more direct, frustration bubbling to the surface as they described how Reynolds had humiliated or targeted them without cause. One young attendant named Rachel Alvarez described a moment when Reynolds had scolded her in front of passengers for allegedly not knowing her place. Her voice trembled as she spoke, tears welling in her eyes. I thought maybe it was my fault, Rachel admitted, like I had done something wrong. But hearing everyone else talk, I realize now it wasn't just me. Maya listened carefully, taking notes and offering reassurance. With each interview, the pieces of the puzzle came together. Reynolds' pattern was undeniable. His temper, his need for control, and his tendency to target those who could not fight back. By mid-afternoon, Maya could feel the exhaustion setting in. But she pushed through. She knew the crew members needed to feel heard, and she refused to let their courage go to waste. The final interview of the day was with Samantha Miller. She entered the room quietly, her notebook clutched in her hand like a lifeline. Unlike earlier, her posture was straighter, her expression steadier. Maya offered her a warm smile. Samantha, thank you for coming. Sam sat down and placed her notebook on the table. I have already given you this, she said, gesturing toward it. But I wanted to say something else. Maya exchanged a glance with David before turning back to Sam. Go ahead, she encouraged softly. Sam took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly before she steadied them. Yesterday, when Captain Reynolds accused you, I knew what he was doing. I saw it happening, and I was scared to say anything. But when I found that wallet and you stood up to him, I realized something. Sometimes doing the right thing is hard, but it matters. Her voice wavered, but her gaze was strong as she looked directly at Maya. You gave me the courage to speak up. I just wanted you to know that. Maya felt a knot in her throat as she processed Sam's words. The bravery it took for her to act and to speak up now was not lost on her. You are stronger than you realize, Samantha, Maya said gently. Your voice has made a difference here. Never doubt that. Sam nodded, her cheeks flushing slightly with pride. Thank you. As Sam left the room, the quiet settled like a soft weight. David leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. We have what we need, he said. This isn't just about one incident. It is a pattern. Maya nodded, her resolve solidifying. It is time for action. David closed his folder and looked at her thoughtfully. You know, Maya, this would not have happened if you had not stood up yesterday. You showed them they could be brave, too. Maya smiled faintly, though there was a hint of sadness in her eyes. Sometimes people just need to see that they are not alone. She turned to look out the window, the sun dipping lower in the sky. The day had been long and exhausting, but it had been necessary. For years, people like Reynolds had silenced others through fear and arrogance. But today, Maya had seen something else, something powerful. Courage. It had begun as a whisper, timid and uncertain, but it was growing louder, and Maya knew that this time, change was within reach. Maya Anderson sat alone in her office, the soft glow of her desk lamp illuminating stacks of notes, reports, and witness statements. The interviews with the flight crew from earlier that day lingered in her mind like faint echoes, each story a puzzle piece, revealing a clear but troubling picture of systemic failure. For every voice that had spoken up, there were likely dozens more who had remained silent, their experiences swallowed by fear. The city skyline stretched beyond her window, the last threads of sunset fading into a canvas of deep blue. Maya's office, usually a haven of calm, felt heavier tonight. She leaned back in her chair, the familiar ache in her shoulders, a reminder of the day's work. Sam's words lingered in her mind. Sometimes doing the right thing is hard, but it matters. Those words had struck something deep within Maya. They reminded her of her own beginnings, the moments in her career when she had questioned her worth, her voice, and her place at the table. The courage it took for someone like Sam, a frontline employee, to speak up against authority was no small thing. That bravery carried weight, and Maya refused to let it go unheard. Her phone buzzed, snapping her from her thoughts. She glanced at the screen. David Clark. "David," Maya answered, her voice calm but weary. "It is late. What have you got for me?" "Updates," David replied. His voice was firm, but carried an undercurrent of optimism. "The HR team has cross-referenced complaints and reports from the last 18 months. It's clear Reynolds's behavior goes beyond what we heard today. Several crew members filed formal reports, some through HR, others informally, but nothing was done. Those complaints never made it past mid-level management." Maya's grip on the phone tightened slightly. "How many reports?" 10, David said. "And that is just what we found tonight. I suspect more may come forward once word spreads that we are taking this seriously." Maya exhaled slowly, her mind turning over the implications. "And what about Reynolds?" David hesitated for just a moment. "He's been quiet, but legal sent him a formal notice regarding his suspension pending investigation. I expect we will hear from his lawyer soon." "Let him fight," Maya said evenly, her voice edged with resolve. "The facts are on our side." "I thought you would say that," David replied with a faint smile audible in his voice. "I will update Richard Mason in the morning. Try to get some rest, Maya. You've earned it." "Thank you, David," Maya said softly, before ending the call. As she set the phone down, her gaze fell to Sam's notebook still resting at the edge of her desk. The worn pages represented more than just evidence. They were proof of something Maya had believed in her entire career, that real change often began with ordinary people who found the courage to act. The next morning, Maya was up before sunrise, her sharp heels clicking against the tile floors of Horizon Airlines corporate headquarters. A board meeting had been called for 8 a.m., and Maya had prepared meticulously. She carried a thick folder filled with evidence interview transcripts, witness statements, and copies of ignored HR complaints. As she stepped into the executive boardroom, the air was heavy with unspoken tension. Richard Mason sat at the head of the table, his brow furrowed in thought. Around the table were the board members, all clad in suits and guarded expressions. At the far end of the room, Ellen Monroe from HR and David Clark sat waiting, files spread out in front of them. Maya took her seat near the center, her posture straight, her face composed. She had been in rooms like this before, rooms where voices like hers had to fight harder to be heard. But this time, she was ready. "Thank you all for joining us," Richard began, his voice steady but clipped. "We are here today to address the findings from the investigation into Captain Ethan Reynolds' conduct. Maya Anderson has been leading this process, and she will present the key findings." Maya nodded and rose to her feet, unfolding the thick folder in front of her. "Over the past 48 hours, we have conducted interviews with multiple flight attendants and crew members. What we discovered paints a troubling picture." She paused, scanning the room. "Captain Reynolds has demonstrated a pattern of inappropriate behavior, bullying, discriminatory actions, and abuse of authority. Over 10 formal complaints were filed with HR over the last 18 months, and all were dismissed or ignored at various levels. I have statements here detailing his actions, humiliating crew members, targeting employees based on race, and creating a toxic environment that has impacted both staff morale and passenger experience." The room fell silent, save for the faint shuffle of papers as some board members glanced at the documents David and Ellen had distributed earlier. One of the older board members, Eleanor Grayson, leaned back in her chair. her expression skeptical. Maya, these are serious accusations. Are we absolutely sure of the facts? Captain Reynolds has been with us for years. He is well respected. Maya's gaze hardened slightly, though her tone remained composed. Respect does not excuse misconduct, Eleanor, and the facts are indisputable. These voices cannot be ignored any longer. Ellen Monroe from HR spoke up, her voice clear. The ignored complaints represent a failure on our part as a company. There is no question about the legitimacy of these concerns. David followed quickly. If this goes unchecked, Horizon Airlines risks serious legal and reputational consequences. This is not just about one employee, it is about the systems we have in place, or in this case, the systems that failed. Eleanor nodded slowly, clearly processing the weight of their words. Around the table, the other board members murmured in agreement. Richard Mason cleared his throat, reclaiming the room. It is clear to me that action is needed. His gaze shifted to Maya. What do you recommend? Maya straightened, her voice calm, but unwavering. First, Captain Reynolds must be terminated effective immediately. His behavior is not in alignment with Horizon's values, and we must hold him accountable. Second, we need to conduct a full review of our HR policies to understand why these complaints were ignored and ensure it does not happen again. Third, I recommend implementing mandatory diversity and inclusion training for all employees, starting with leadership. The room was quiet, the weight of her words settling in. Finally, Richard nodded. Agreed. Effective today, we move forward with your recommendations. I will draft an official statement for the media. But Maya, this is yours to lead. I trust you to guide us through this. Maya nodded, relief washing over her even as the enormity of the task ahead settled on her shoulders. Thank you, Richard. I will not let you down. That afternoon, Maya stood before a podium in Horizon Airlines' press room, cameras flashing as reporters jostled for position. She wore a simple navy suit, her expression composed and professional. The media had caught wind of the incident, and it was time to address the storm directly. Good afternoon, Maya began, her voice steady as it carried across the room. Horizon Airlines is committed to providing a workplace and travel experience that is rooted in respect, safety, and dignity for all. Recently, we uncovered unacceptable conduct that fell short of our standards, and we take full responsibility. Effective immediately, we are taking action to address these failures, hold those responsible accountable, and rebuild trust with our employees and passengers. The questions came quickly after that, but Maya answered each one calmly, firmly, and without hesitation. By the time she stepped away from the podium, the whispers of doubt had quieted. She had reclaimed the narrative, steering it away from scandal and toward accountability and change. Back in her office, Maya finally allowed herself to exhale. The work was far from done. This was only the beginning. But for the first time in days, she felt hope. Her phone buzzed, and she glanced at the message. It was from Sam. You gave us a voice, Maya. Thank you. Maya smiled faintly, her chest tight with a mix of pride and humility. Change, she thought, is not born from grand gestures. It begins with whispers, small voices, unexpected kindness, and grows into something unstoppable. And Maya knew this was just the beginning. The morning light broke over Horizon Airlines headquarters, splashing through the expansive lobby windows and casting long streaks of gold across the marble floors. Inside, the tension in the air was unmistakable. The hum of conversations, the shuffle of hurried footsteps, it all spoke of change, of something stirring beneath the surface. Upstairs in the executive conference room, Maya Anderson sat beside David Clark, watching as the final pieces of the investigation into Captain Reynolds were reviewed. Stacks of reports, witness statements, and formal complaints lay before them, evidence that could no longer be ignored. Maya's hands rested atop a folder, her fingers lightly brushing against its edges. Her expression was calm, but her eyes reflected a simmering resolve. Richard Mason, the CEO, stood at the head of the table, reviewing the findings with furrowed brows. Next to him, Ellen Monroe from HR shifted nervously in her seat, clearly uncomfortable with the weight of what the investigation had unearthed. The quiet in the room stretched as Richard set the final report down and straightened, his expression hard to read. "This is damning," Richard said finally, his voice low. "The complaints span years. How is this allowed to continue unchecked?" Ellen cleared her throat and spoke hesitantly. Some of the earlier complaints were mishandled. Mid-level management ignored the reports, believing Captain Reynolds was too valuable to the airline to be disciplined. "Too valuable?" Richard repeated sharply, his tone tinged with disbelief. He turned his gaze to Maya. "And yet here we are, on the verge of a PR nightmare, because one man's arrogance was allowed to fester." Maya leaned forward, her voice steady and deliberate. "This is not just about Captain Reynolds. Yes, he must be held accountable, but this failure is systemic. Our policies are flawed. Employees did not feel safe reporting his actions because they believed no one would listen." David nodded in agreement, adjusting his glasses as he flipped through his notes. "The evidence is overwhelming. Captain Reynolds' conduct, especially his targeting of employees and passengers based on race, was not isolated. It was part of a pattern." Richard sighed deeply, pinching the bridge of his nose as if trying to steady himself. "We will deal with Reynolds, but the board will demand answers. How do we prevent this from happening again?" Maya met his gaze without hesitation. "We rebuild. From the ground up. We start by removing Reynolds, immediately and publicly, as a statement of accountability. Then, we focus on fixing our culture. Implement mandatory diversity and sensitivity training for all staff, particularly leadership. Create an anonymous reporting system so employees can voice concerns without fear of retaliation." Richard nodded slowly, considering her words. "It is ambitious, but I agree. If we are going to clean up this mess, we need to do it right. No half measures." David leaned back in his chair, his pen tapping lightly against his notebook. "I'll draft the legal documents for Reynolds' termination today. His lawyer will likely push back, but we have enough evidence to hold firm." Maya exhaled softly, the weight of progress settling on her shoulders. "Thank you, David." Richard looked around the table, his sharp gaze sweeping over the room. "Make no mistake, this will be a challenge, but we are fortunate to have the right person leading this effort." His attention turned to Maya, his voice firm. "I want you to oversee the cultural reforms, Maya, publicly and internally. You have earned the trust of this team, and you've earned mine." Maya felt the room shift slightly, as though everyone was looking at her with new eyes. For a long time, she had fought to be seen, to be heard not just as a professional, but as a leader capable of driving real change. And now, that moment had come. "I will not let you down," she said simply. Richard nodded. "I know you won't." By early afternoon, word had spread throughout the company. Captain Ethan Reynolds had been terminated effective immediately, pending a full legal review. His suspension had escalated to a formal dismissal, and while no announcement had been made publicly yet, the news rippled through the halls of Horizon Airlines like a wave. Employees murmured in clusters near coffee stations and in hallways, exchanging glances that ranged from surprise to quiet relief. Maya, however, was already focused on the next steps. She had called for a meeting with the flight crew to address the outcome of the investigation and begin laying out the reforms. The company's largest training room had been repurposed for the occasion, rows of chairs neatly lined up, and a podium placed at the front. Maya arrived early, her presence filling the space as she organized her notes. She glanced toward the back of the room and saw Samantha Miller standing there quietly, nervously twisting the strap of her bag. Maya smiled faintly and motioned her forward. "Samantha," Maya said warmly as the younger woman approached. You came. Sam nodded, her expression uncertain. I wanted to see what happens next. I guess I just wanted to know if it was worth it. It was worth it, Maya said firmly. Your courage helped make this possible. Sam looked down, her cheeks flushing faintly. I never thought someone like me could make a difference. Maya placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Never doubt your voice, Samantha. You showed us all that change starts with speaking up, even when it feels impossible. Sam smiled shyly, her posture relaxing just a little. Thank you, Miss Anderson, for everything. Maya gave her a small nod before moving toward the podium. By now, flight attendants, pilots, and ground staff were filing into the room, taking their seats and murmuring quietly among themselves. The energy was a mix of uncertainty and hope. When the room was full, Maya stepped forward and addressed the group. Her voice carried a quiet authority, steady and clear. Good afternoon, she began. I know this has been a difficult few days for all of us. What happened with Captain Reynolds brought to light issues that have been overlooked for far too long. But today, we take the first steps towards something better. The room fell silent, all eyes fixed on her. For too long, employees have felt unheard, undervalued, or afraid to speak up when something is wrong. That ends now. Horizon Airlines is implementing a new anonymous reporting system, so your voices are protected. We are also launching mandatory diversity and inclusion training to ensure respect and accountability become the foundation of our culture. A ripple of quiet surprise swept through the room. Maya continued, her voice softening slightly. This is only the beginning. Real change takes time, but I promise you, we are committed to getting this right. Every employee here matters. Every passenger we serve matters. Together, we will create an environment where everyone is treated with dignity and respect. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle before adding, and none of this would have happened without the bravery of people like Samantha Miller, who chose to stand up and speak out. The crowd turned to look at Sam, who sat near the back, her face turning crimson as a murmur of applause swept through the room. Maya smiled softly. Change begins with people like you, people who are willing to believe that their voice matters. The applause grew louder, and for the first time, Maya saw hope reflected in the faces of the flight crew. It was a whisper of change, yes, but whispers had a way of turning into something much louder. Later that evening, as the building emptied and the last of the sun disappeared behind the skyline, Maya sat in her office, her mind quieter than it had been in days. A soft knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. "Come in," she called. David Clark stepped inside, holding a single sheet of paper. "I thought you would want to see this." Maya took the document and scanned it. It was a statement from one of the junior flight attendants who had spoken earlier. At the bottom, a handwritten note read, "Thank you for listening. For the first time, I feel like things might actually change." Maya let out a slow breath, a faint smile tugging at her lips. She set the paper down and looked out the window at the city beyond. Change was never easy, but it was happening one step at a time. She thought again of Sam and the other crew members who had found the courage to speak up. Unexpected kindness had broken through walls that had stood for years, and now, the truth was finally being heard. As Maya turned off her office light and gathered her things, she felt something new stirring within her, something steady and bright. Hope. The walls of Horizon Airlines' largest conference room reverberated with quiet anticipation. For the first time in years, the space was not being used for corporate presentations or budget meetings. Instead, employees, flight attendants, pilots, ground staff, and managers were gathering to attend the airline's first-ever diversity, inclusion, and accountability training. The company's response to recent events was swift, decisive, and public, and this training marked the beginning of tangible change. Maya Anderson stood near the podium, clipboard in hand, observing the room as people filed in. Faces reflected a mix of emotions: curiosity, wariness, hope, mirroring the uncertainty she felt deep inside. It was one thing to implement policies and deliver statements. It was quite another to transform a culture rooted in years of indifference and overlooked issues. "Is this going to be another box-checking exercise?" she heard someone whisper. Maya's chest tightened slightly, but she let the comment pass. Skepticism was natural, even expected. Change was difficult to accept, especially when trust had been eroded for so long. But if there was one thing Maya knew, it was this: perseverance would carry them through. At the back of the room, David Clark, Horizon's legal counsel, was speaking quietly with Ellen Monroe from HR. Nearby, Samantha Miller hovered by the coffee table, offering cups and soft encouragement to her colleagues. Maya smiled faintly. In just a few days, Sam had transformed her posture straighter, her presence bolder. Small changes, but they were meaningful. A ripple of murmurs broke Maya's thoughts as Richard Mason, the CEO, entered the room. He strode to the front, his tall frame commanding attention. Despite the burden of recent events, there was a resolve in his movements, a readiness to stand behind what was right. Richard approached Maya with a nod. "It's a full room," he said, his voice low but firm. "How are you feeling?" Maya glanced at the rows of chairs quickly filling up, then back at him, prepared. "This is only the beginning, but it's a step we need to take." Richard studied her for a moment and nodded approvingly. "It's a step we should have taken long ago, but you are the reason we are here now, Maya. Don't forget that." Maya smiled faintly, a flicker of pride warming her chest. She turned back to the podium as Richard raised a hand to quiet the room. The chatter settled, and all eyes turned toward him. "Good afternoon," Richard began, his voice calm but commanding. "Thank you for being here. Over the past week, we have faced difficult truths as a company, truth that demand action. What happened was unacceptable, and it revealed cracks in our foundation that cannot be ignored. This training is part of our commitment to building a stronger, fairer culture at Horizon Airlines, one that values every employee and every passenger." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "Real change does not happen overnight, but it starts with us. It starts today. I trust each of you to engage in this process with open minds and open hearts." Richard stepped aside, and Maya took his place at the podium. The room grew quiet again as her presence filled the space. She took a deep breath and began, her voice steady but full of purpose. "Thank you, Richard, and thank you all for coming today." She glanced across the room, her gaze steady. "Over the past week, I have heard stories that are difficult to process. I have spoken to flight attendants, crew members, and others across this company who have experienced moments of doubt, fear, or frustration because they felt unheard. That ends now." A few heads nodded. Maya pressed on, her tone softening slightly. "This training is not about blame. It is about understanding. Understanding how our biases, even the unconscious ones, can shape our actions. It is about accountability, not just holding others responsible, but holding ourselves to the highest standards of integrity. And it is about creating a workplace where each of us feels seen, valued, and respected." Maya allowed a small pause before adding, "This will not be easy. Change rarely is. But every one of you here has the power to shape the culture of this company. It begins with listening and learning, and with choosing to be part of the solution." The room remained still, the employees processing her words. Maya nodded toward a screen behind her as the training facilitator, a diversity and inclusion specialist, stepped forward to begin. Over the next several hours, the atmosphere shifted as the training unfolded. Through videos, group discussions, and guided exercises, The employees confronted uncomfortable truths. Maya watched quietly from the sidelines as the facilitator led them through scenarios that forced self-reflection. A passenger who is treated differently because of the color of their skin, a crew member who is belittled for asking a question, a manager who dismisses complaints as overreactions. As the group conversations deepened, Maya noticed small but encouraging moments. In one corner, a senior flight attendant admitted, "I always thought avoiding conflict was the right choice. I did not realize silence could cause more harm." At another table, a young pilot spoke softly, "I never considered how my assumptions might affect someone else. This gives me a lot to think about." And then there was Samantha Miller, sitting at a table near the front. She was speaking with a small group, her voice clear and confident. "When I saw Captain Reynolds target Miss Anderson on that flight, I froze. I was scared, but watching her stand her ground made me realize how important it is to speak up, even when it feels hard." Maya's chest tightened as she watched Sam's colleagues nod in agreement. This is how change begins, she thought. One voice becomes two. Two voices become 10. By the end of the day, the training wrapped up, and employees began filtering out, their expressions quieter and more reflective than before. Some stopped to thank the facilitator. Others simply left, deep in thought. Richard Mason approached Maya, his arms crossed, a small smile on his face. "I think you are starting to get through to them," he said. "It's a start," Maya replied softly, watching as Samantha lingered at the door, speaking quietly with a few colleagues. "This isn't about a single day. We need to keep the momentum going." Richard nodded. "We will. This isn't just a PR initiative. This is about who we are as a company. I'll make sure the board sees that." As Richard left, Maya turned back to the nearly empty room. Sam caught her eye and walked over, clutching her bag. "Miss Anderson," Sam said, a small smile on her face. "Today felt different." "It was," Maya replied, her tone warm. "And you were a big part of that, Sam. You shared your story, and it mattered." Sam flushed slightly, but her smile grew. "I just hope this really changes things." "It will," Maya said, with a quiet certainty she felt deep in her bones. "Because people like you are willing to stand up and lead the way." Sam nodded and turned to leave, her steps lighter than before. Maya stood alone in the training room, the faint hum of the building settling around her. She knew this was only the beginning. There would be resistance, there always was. But today had been a turning point. The employees of Horizon Airlines had begun to see themselves not as passive observers, but as active participants in shaping their culture. Maya walked to the window, gazing out at the tarmac where planes were preparing for takeoff. The engines roared, steady and strong, carrying people toward distant destinations. For the first time in weeks, Maya felt a sense of peace. Change was in motion, like the planes outside, and though the path ahead would not be easy, it was one worth walking. As the sun dipped below the horizon, its golden light reflected against the wings of a departing plane. It was a quiet reminder of what Maya had always believed. Progress may take time, but it always finds its way forward, step by step, voice by voice. The hum of conversation filled the Horizon Airlines corporate cafeteria as employees gathered for a late lunch. Pilots sat beside flight attendants, mechanics chatted with administrative staff, and for the first time in a long time, there was an energy of cautious hope in the air. Maya Anderson watched the scene from a corner table, a paper coffee cup cradled in her hands. She hadn't planned on sitting here, her schedule rarely allowed for time spent in communal spaces, but today, something had drawn her in. It wasn't just the completion of the first diversity and inclusion training, it was the subtle shift she felt. It wasn't monumental yet, but change rarely was at first. A ripple, that's what this was. And ripples, she knew, grew into waves. "Miss Anderson?" Maya looked up to see Samantha Miller hovering nearby, holding a tray with a salad and a cup of water. She looked shy but hopeful. "Do you mind if I join you?" Maya smiled warmly. "Of course, Samantha. Please sit." Sam settled into the seat across from her, her movements quick and precise, as though she were still on duty. There was something brighter about her now, her eyes clearer, her shoulders less weighed down by the burden of timidity. "I didn't expect to see you down here," Sam said, fiddling with the lid of her water bottle. "Not many executives come to the cafeteria." Maya took a sip of her coffee, smiling faintly. "I wanted to see what today felt like for everyone. Sometimes you learn more by observing." Sam nodded, picking at her salad with her fork. "It feels different," she admitted after a moment. "Like people are finally starting to believe things can change." "They can," Maya said gently. "But it takes time, and it takes people like you who are willing to keep speaking up." Sam glanced up, her expression sincere. "I've been thinking about that a lot lately. About what you said, how small voices matter. I used to think I was just invisible, someone who was easy to overlook. But after everything that happened, I realized I can make a difference." Maya's chest swelled with a mix of pride and humility. Sam's words were soft, but the strength behind them was undeniable. This, Maya thought, was why the fight was worth it. "You are making a difference, Samantha," Maya replied, "and you're not alone anymore." Before Sam could respond, the cafeteria doors swung open, drawing both of their attention. Richard Mason, Horizon's CEO, entered with a small group of senior leaders, clearly in the middle of a conversation. Maya watched as his gaze swept the room, lingering briefly on her. He gave her a small nod, a silent acknowledgement of her efforts, before turning his attention back to his team. Sam followed Maya's gaze. "Do you think he really means it? That things will get better?" Maya met her eyes. "Richard is committed to this, but it's not just about him or me. It's about everyone here holding each other accountable. Culture isn't changed from the top down alone. It happens when every person decides to do better." Sam considered her words, a quiet determination settling over her features. "I believe that. I just hope the others do too." Maya nodded. "They will. Give it time." The ripple effects of the training were already being felt across the company. Over the next several days, Maya received dozens of emails from employees who had participated in the sessions. Some were short and simple words of thanks, expressions of hope, while others shared personal stories of moments they had felt unseen or unheard. One email in particular stood out. Subject: "Thank you from James Walker, Maintenance Crew Lead. Miss Anderson, I wanted to say thank you for what you're doing. I've worked at Horizon Airlines for 15 years, and this is the first time I've seen someone really listen to us. I've been in situations where I didn't feel like I mattered, where I felt overlooked because of who I am. Seeing you stand up to Captain Reynolds and fight for change gave me hope that things will finally be different. Keep going. People like me are counting on you." Maya read the email twice, her throat tightening. She closed her laptop gently and leaned back in her chair, letting the words sink in. James's message wasn't unique. She had heard similar sentiments before from Sam, from crew members during the interviews, and even from employees she passed in the halls who offered quiet nods of gratitude. This was what leadership meant. It wasn't about titles or press conferences. It was about being the kind of person others could trust to fight for them. For the first time in her career, Maya felt the full weight of that responsibility, and she welcomed it. By the end of the week, Maya had assembled a small team to oversee Horizon Airlines' cultural reforms. The team was diverse, pulling members from every corner of the company: flight attendants, ground crew, maintenance workers, and mid-level managers. At the head of the table during their first meeting sat Maya, with David Clark by her side. "Thank you all for being here," Maya began, glancing around the table at the group. Samantha sat near the front, her notebook open and ready. Across from her, James Walker, the maintenance crew lead who had sent the email, gave Maya a quiet nod of respect. "This team represents a new chapter for Horizon Airlines," Maya continued. "Our job is not just to oversee policy changes, but to ensure they work. We will listen to employees, address concerns, and hold each other accountable. No more ignored reports. No more silenced voices." James cleared his throat, drawing Maya's attention. "What happens if someone like Reynolds shows up again?" he asked bluntly. Maya didn't hesitate. "Then we act swiftly and transparently. What happened before cannot happen again, and it's up to us to make sure of that." The group nodded, their expressions serious but resolute. Samantha raised her hand, earning a smile from Maya. "I think we should hold regular meetings with employees like town halls. Let them know they're being heard." Maya's smile widened. "That's an excellent idea, Samantha. We'll make it happen." As the meeting progressed, the room buzzed with ideas, plans, and possibilities. Maya listened intently, taking notes and encouraging each voice at the table. For the first time in weeks, the weight on her shoulders felt lighter, not because the work was done, but because she knew she wasn't carrying it alone anymore. The following Monday, Horizon Airlines held a press briefing to announce their reforms. The room was packed with reporters and cameras, their lenses trained on Maya as she stepped up to the podium. Her navy suit was sharp, her posture poised, but her voice was what carried the room. Over the past few weeks, Horizon Airlines has faced hard truths about who we are and where we fell short. We are committed to rebuilding the trust of our employees and passengers. That begins with accountability, transparency, and real cultural change. She outlined the reform's mandatory training, the new reporting system, and the cultural task force overseeing the changes. This is not just about one incident or one individual. It is about ensuring that Horizon Airlines becomes a place where every person is treated with respect and dignity, regardless of their role or background. As she finished, reporters shouted questions, but Maya stepped away, confident in the message she had delivered. That evening, Maya sat in her office, looking out at the tarmac as planes came and went, their engines roaring softly against the night. Her phone buzzed on her desk, and she glanced at the screen. Message from Samantha. "We did it. Thank you for believing in us." Maya smiled, setting the phone down as a sense of quiet peace settled over her. Ripples had turned into waves. Change was happening not all at once, but steadily, and as long as there were people willing to fight for it, Maya knew the future would be brighter. The sound of heels clicking on the marble floors echoed softly as Maya Anderson walked down the main corridor of Horizon Airlines headquarters. The once familiar space felt different now, lighter somehow. Employees greeted her with quiet nods, some offering smiles of gratitude that spoke more than words ever could. It had been 3 weeks since the company announced its cultural reforms. The press conference had gone better than Maya expected, and the employees who once whispered their fears in closed rooms were beginning to find their voices. Change was still fragile, but it was real. Each day brought small reminders that progress, no matter how gradual, was reshaping Horizon Airlines. Today marked another step forward. The first employee town hall was about to begin, an event Maya had championed to give staff a platform to speak openly about their concerns, share ideas, and be heard. The room would be filled with pilots, flight attendants, ground crew, and corporate employees, a diverse gathering that reflected the heartbeat of the airline. As she entered the large auditorium, Maya felt a quiet wave of nerves ripple through her, though she showed none of it. It was a full house, rows of chairs occupied by employees from every level of the company. Some leaned forward with interest, while others sat back, skeptical but present. Maya welcomed it all. Skepticism meant they still cared enough to question. At the front of the room, her task force sat ready. Samantha Miller was there, her notebook open in front of her. Next to her was James Walker, the maintenance lead who had written Maya that heartfelt email. Other team members from HR, operations, and customer service sat alongside them, their presence signaling the shift Maya had fought for, an inclusive leadership table where voices from all corners of the airline were heard. Richard Mason, the CEO, entered quietly, giving Maya an encouraging nod before taking a seat near the front. This was her moment to lead, and everyone knew it. Maya approached the podium, her gaze sweeping the room, as the chatter gradually faded into silence. "Good afternoon," she began, her voice steady and calm. "Thank you all for being here today. This town hall is the first of many opportunities for us to connect openly, honestly, and without fear of judgment. Over the past few weeks, we have taken the first steps toward rebuilding trust within this company. I want you to know that this is not the end of that effort. It is only the beginning." She paused, letting her words settle before continuing. "I know that change can feel uncomfortable. I also know there are those of you who wonder if these reforms are real or just for show. Let me be clear. We are here to listen, and we are here to act. This is your airline as much as it is mine, as much as it is Richard's or anyone else's in this room. You deserve to work in an environment where you are respected, valued, and safe, no matter who you are or where you come from." The room remained quiet, but Maya could sense the energy shifting. People were listening. That was all she needed. "I want to hear from you today," Maya said, softening her tone. "The good, the bad, and everything in between. Your experiences, your concerns, and your ideas will shape the future of this airline. Your voices matter here." She stepped back, signaling the beginning of the open forum. For a moment, the room was still, as though no one wanted to be the first to speak. Then a hand rose near the front. It was a middle-aged flight attendant with graying hair and a sharp posture. Maya nodded to her. The woman stood, clutching the microphone handed to her by a team member. "I've been with Horizon for 20 years, she began, her voice strong but edged with emotion. "I love this company, but there were times I felt invisible, especially when I spoke up about things I saw that were wrong. I stopped reporting because I didn't think anyone cared." Maya met her gaze with empathy. "Thank you for sharing that," she said. "Your experience reflects why we're here today. No one should feel invisible, and we are committed to ensuring that employees like you are not only heard, but respected for speaking up." The woman nodded, her expression softening. She returned to her seat, and a ripple of conversation stirred the room. Slowly, other hands began to rise. James Walker spoke next, his voice steady and practical. "We've seen new reporting systems rolled out before, but they always fell apart because no one took them seriously. How will this time be different?" Maya nodded, expecting the question. "That's a fair point, James. This time we've implemented a third-party reporting system to ensure objectivity and accountability. Reports won't disappear or be swept under the rug. They will be reviewed independently and acted on transparently. I promise you that." James gave a small, approving nod before sitting back. The questions continued. A baggage handler shared frustrations about a manager who played favorites. A young flight attendant nervously raised concerns about inconsistency in communication between departments. Pilots voiced worries about how these cultural changes might impact operations. Maya listened carefully to each one, taking notes, nodding, and offering thoughtful responses. She didn't pretend to have all the answers. She knew the work was far from done, but she promised action, and that promise carried weight. The final hand that rose was Samantha Miller's. Maya's heart swelled as the young woman stood, her voice steady. "I just wanted to say thank you," Sam said, her gaze directed toward Maya. "A month ago, I would never have believed that people at this company would care about what I had to say. But seeing how you fought for us, how you listened and acted, it gave me hope. I think we're on the right path." A soft murmur of agreement passed through the room as Sam sat back down. Maya's smile was small but genuine. "Thank you, Samantha. You are proof that change begins with courage. We're stronger because of voices like yours." The town hall ended after 2 hours, and as employees filed out, the room buzzed with quiet conversation. Maya remained near the door, shaking hands and thanking those who stopped to speak with her. A few offered quick words of encouragement. Others shared quiet observations. But there was one common theme: hope. As the room emptied, Richard Mason approached, his expression reflective. "You've done something remarkable here, Maya," he said. "This room felt different today, like people are starting to believe again." Maya exhaled softly, the exhaustion of the day settling over her. "It's a start, Richard. That's all I wanted, to start something real." "And you have," he replied firmly. "Keep leading like this, and Horizon Airlines will not just recover, it will thrive." Maya nodded, gratitude flickering in her chest. She watched as Sam and a group of flight attendants exited the auditorium, laughing quietly among themselves. Their steps seemed lighter, their presence brighter, a reflection of what was possible when people were given a voice. That evening, as Maya sat in her office with the lights dimmed, she allowed herself a moment to reflect. The first ripples of change had spread, but she knew this was only the beginning. Culture could not be transformed overnight. It was built through perseverance, trust, and a willingness to listen, to truly listen. Her phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Sam. "I just wanted to say thank you again. You believed in us before we believed in ourselves. That means more than you know." Maya smiled faintly, her heart swelling with quiet pride. She looked out the window at the tarmac below, where the lights of Horizon's planes twinkled like distant stars against the night sky. Change was in the air. It was fragile, yes, but it was real, and Maya knew, deep in her soul, that this was the path she was meant to walk. As long as there were voices like Sam's, voices waiting to be heard, she would keep fighting one ripple at a time. The early morning sunlight filtered through the tall windows of Horizon Airlines' executive wing, casting soft golden streaks across the polished floors. The building, which had felt heavy with tension just weeks ago, now carried a renewed sense of energy. The hum of activity, the click of heels, the quiet exchanges of greetings seemed lighter, almost purposeful, as though the people within its walls were breathing differently. In her office, Maya Anderson sat at her desk, sifting through emails as the city below began to wake. A fresh cup of coffee sat beside her, steam curling toward the ceiling in lazy ribbons. The quiet moments before her day began were precious to her now, a time to center herself before stepping back into the storm of work that change required. The past few weeks had been intense, but transformative. Employee town halls were now regular occurrences. The anonymous reporting system had already received its first set of actionable reports, and the diversity training sessions were underway across every department. Crew members who had once worked in fear of being ignored were starting to speak openly, and the company was taking their concerns seriously. It wasn't perfect, change never was, but Maya could see the difference. It was in the voices of the employees, the shifts in conversation, and the small but significant decisions being made at every level of the company. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from David Clark, the company's general counsel. "Internal HR audit results are in. We need to discuss. Meet me in the boardroom at 10. Maya frowned slightly, curiosity flickering in her mind. She quickly replied, confirming the meeting, and glanced at the clock. An hour remained, just enough time to make her rounds. Maya's first stop was the operations floor, a vast open space where dispatchers and coordinators worked together to ensure smooth flight schedules. The buzz of conversation and the hum of monitors filled the room as Maya walked through, offering quiet nods to employees who glanced her way. At a corner desk, Samantha Miller stood beside a flight scheduling team, chatting animatedly as they reviewed crew assignments on a large screen. Sam's body language had changed dramatically since the day Maya met her. She was confident now, her voice clear and unshaken. When Sam noticed Maya, her face lit up. "Miss Anderson," she said, stepping away from the group. "Good morning." "Good morning, Samantha," Maya replied warmly. "How are things here?" Sam smiled, glancing back at the team behind her. "Better. People are communicating more openly, and the crews are finally feeling like they're being heard. It's a small step, but it means a lot." Maya nodded. "Small steps lead to big changes, and you've been a big part of that." Sam flushed slightly, though her smile remained steady. "Thank you. I still can't believe how far things have come." Maya placed a hand gently on Sam's shoulder. "Believe it, Sam. You're proof that standing up and speaking out can make a difference." Sam nodded, her expression sincere. "Thank you, Miss Anderson. Really, for everything." As Maya walked away, she glanced back to see Sam rejoining her team, her voice rising above the hum of conversation. That was leadership, Maya thought. It didn't always come with a title, but it carried a power that could inspire others. By 10 a.m., Maya was seated at the long glass conference table in the executive boardroom. David Clark entered moments later, a thick folder in his hands. His expression was focused but unreadable as he took a seat across from her. "Thanks for coming, Maya," he said, sliding the folder toward her. "This is the full report from our internal HR audit." Maya opened the folder, scanning the first few pages. The audit had examined past employee complaints, focusing on reports that had been ignored, mishandled, or dismissed entirely. David's voice broke the silence. "The results are mixed," he said. "On one hand, it's clear that systemic failures allowed behavior like Reynolds to persist for so long. Mid-level managers either dismissed complaints or felt pressure to protect senior employees they considered untouchable." Maya's jaw tightened slightly, though she kept her expression composed. "And on the other hand?" David leaned back in his chair. "The good news is that the changes we've implemented are already working. The anonymous reporting system has received its first legitimate reports, and employees are starting to trust that they'll be taken seriously. The cultural task force you formed is also making an impact. Employees feel empowered to speak up for the first time in years." Maya closed the folder gently, her mind already processing the information. "This is a start, David, but we can't let up now. The audit results need to be shared with the board and the employees. Transparency is key to maintaining trust." David nodded. "I agree. I'll schedule a follow-up with Richard Mason this afternoon to align on next steps. The audit doesn't just show what went wrong, it proves how far we've come." Maya met his gaze, a faint smile pulling at her lips. "And how far we still have to go." "True," David said with a small grin, "but progress is progress." That afternoon, Maya found herself boarding a short domestic flight, a routine trip she hadn't taken in months. For once, it wasn't business. The airline had invited her to visit a newly renovated crew hub at one of its regional airports, where the reforms were beginning to take shape. As she entered the cabin, Maya noticed a difference immediately. The flight attendants, bright-eyed and welcoming, moved through the aisle with genuine smiles. Passengers settled into their seats, greeted with warmth and professionalism that felt refreshing. She took her seat near the front, glancing out the window as the ground crew completed their final checks. Moments later, a familiar voice broke through her thoughts. "Miss Anderson?" Maya turned to see a flight attendant leaning toward her seat with a friendly smile. It was Samantha Miller, her crisp uniform immaculate, her posture poised with confidence. "I wasn't expecting to see you here," Sam said cheerfully. "I'll be leading the cabin crew for this flight." Maya smiled, her chest swelling with pride. "Samantha, it's good to see you." Sam's face softened slightly, and for a moment she dropped her professional tone. "You know," she said, "I've been thinking about something. Before all of this, I was just trying to get through each day. But now, I feel like I'm part of something bigger. It's because of you." Maya shook her head gently. It's because of you, Samantha. I may have pushed for change, but you were brave enough to stand up when it mattered most. Sam straightened, a genuine smile spreading across her face. Thank you for believing in me. As Sam moved down the aisle to continue her pre-flight checks, Maya leaned back in her seat, feeling the hum of the engines begin to vibrate beneath her. Outside the window, the runway stretched out, shimmering under the afternoon sun. The plane lifted off moments later, rising smoothly into the sky. Maya watched as the city fell away beneath her, its edges fading into a vast horizon of blue. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, a soft smile tugging at her lips. This was progress. Not perfection, but progress, a journey that would take time, persistence, and people willing to walk the path together. Maya thought of Sam, of James, of every voice that had dared to speak up. They were the reason the airline was changing. Their courage had sparked the transformation, and it would carry Horizon Airlines toward a better future. The clouds outside shifted as the plane climbed higher, the light breaking through in radiant beams. For the first time in a long while, Maya felt a sense of peace, not because the work was done, but because she knew it was just beginning, and she was ready. As the plane soared steadily forward, Maya gazed out at the endless sky, her heart full of quiet hope. Months later, Horizon Airlines stood as a symbol of what was possible when people chose to listen, act, and change. Maya Anderson sat quietly in her office, looking out at the tarmac, where planes moved gracefully under the afternoon sun. The journey had not been easy. Real change never was, but it had been worth every moment of doubt, resistance, and effort. The employees of Horizon Airlines no longer worked in silence. Pilots, flight attendants, and ground staff alike now spoke openly, knowing their voices mattered. The culture had shifted. New leaders like Samantha Miller were emerging, taking on roles where their courage and kindness could inspire others. Complaints were no longer swept aside, and trust once broken was being rebuilt piece by piece. In her hands, Maya held a small note that had been left on her desk that morning. Thank you for seeing us, for hearing us, and for reminding us that we matter. This airline feels like home again. She read it twice, her heart swelling with gratitude. This wasn't just a win for her, it was a victory for every employee who had once felt overlooked, unheard, or invisible. Maya stood, gathering her things and preparing to leave for the evening. As she walked through the halls, she noticed a hum of conversation and laughter, the kind of easy energy that could only exist where trust had been restored. In the parking lot, she paused to glance at the sky, where a Horizon Airlines plane lifted off in the distance, its wings cutting through the golden light. This is what hope looks like, Maya thought. A journey that begins with courage and ends with possibility. Thank you for watching and experiencing this story of perseverance, courage, and change. Just like Maya's journey shows, progress is possible when we choose to stand up, speak out, and believe in the power of kindness and accountability. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more inspiring narratives like this, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you won't miss any of our upcoming content. Your support allows us to share stories that spark hope and reflection. Together, let's keep spreading kindness, one story at a time. Thank you for being here. We'll see you in the next video.